Hello, I'm Colin Sell and I'm a local Stoke Newington resident, and here I am in Abney Park. So welcome to Abney Park, your very own. And most of this is going to be about the music hall performers who are buried here. Now, music hall, I'll just give you a very short history. Music halls started in the East End of London in the back room of pubs in the very early 19th century, and it became a very popular form, particularly with the working classes. And gradually it grew and grew and grew until music hall theatres, or halls as they were called, were being built all over the country, in all the big metropolitan cities and also in some of the smaller places as well. So if you were smart, you could make quite a good living at moving around the country, going from one venue to another. And one of these smart people is this gentleman here, George Richard Howell, and his performance name was Fred Albert. And Fred Albert was very, very smart about building up a whole area of work for himself, not only in terms of all the places that he played in, but also in writing his own songs. One of the difficulties in being a music hall performer was that you could have a wonderful voice and all the looks and all the comedy and all the costume, but if you didn't have the right material, you were dead. And Fred was very smart. He wrote his own songs. He didn't write the music, but he did write the words. And later on we're going to meet somebody else who did the same, Albert Chevalier. But Fred made a very good career out of it. Not a very long career, he didn't live to be a great age, but then working in music hall was very, very hard work. Very few of them actually made old bones. But Fred wrote some really, really interesting songs, of quite a big variety, and he knew how to get the crowd on his side. You have to remember, of course, that music hall was mainly a working class thing, and it was very, very popular. And if you could get on their side and get them on your side, you were doing all right. So he wrote songs like Brave Captain Webb, which was about Captain Webb, who swam the Channel in 1875. He was the first person to do so, and of course this went down very, very well because he was a British hero. Fred also wrote songs about us fighting off the Russians in the Crimea, and he also wrote some witty songs as well about love and about work. This is a quick burst of one of his songs about work.
All work and no play make Jack a dull boy. Well, a man can't be always at business. If he is, his health and his life he'll destroy. For a man can't be always at business. Hard work, we know, is well in its way, and those who well labour deserve good pay. But you must acknowledge it's true when I say that a man can't be always at business. I sometimes go courting a girl I admire, for a man can't be always at business. And of kissing this young lady ne'er seems to tire. Well, a man can't be always at business. I like to salute her ruby lips bright, because she's so good, so nice and upright. But when she wants kissing from morning till night, a man can't be always at business.
That's Fred Albert, just a short burst of one of his songs, but I think you can see what I mean. One music hall historian said of him that he had a very rapid manner and a cork leg. I've been unable to verify the cork leg. Perhaps it's a euphemism, perhaps it meant that he liked drawing corks out of bottles. Anyway, that's him. He really knew how to run the system, how to make it work in his favour. Very, very smart man altogether, and very smartly dressed. Now we're going to go over to somebody else about 50 or 60 yards over there, who I'm also going to talk about. This is George Walter Davis, whose professional name was Walter Laburnum. He was known as the Jewish costermonger. Now, a costermonger was a man who had a barrow in a street market, and a lot of music hall performers like to identify with that sort of working class job. And Walter Laburnum was very, very popular indeed in the middle of the, and later on in the 19th century. Like Fred Albert, whom I've just been talking about, he started his career at McDonald's Music Hall. Nothing to do with the burgers. McDonald's Music Hall is now Hoxton Hall. If you get the chance to visit Hoxton Hall, it's well worth it, because you can see it is still preserved as an old, intimate music hall performance space. It's rather delightful. And as a pianist, I've played for many music halls, and I've done many of them in Hoxton Hall. Walter Laburnum was something of a swell, or a masher as they were called, in his choice of material. A masher was a young man, usually dressed very, very smartly, who was known for having an eye for the ladies. And masher performers were very popular, inevitably, with the ladies, I suppose. This is one of his songs. It's called The Music Master, and this is one that he used to perform to great success, and it's a love song in a way, but quite a saucy love song. Here's just a snatch of it.
She was called a coquette at the ball in the West, but what did she care for that? The man wasn't there that she loved the best, so she didn't mind what she was at. She thought, though I flirt here as much as I can, and behave in a terrible manner, my heart is at home with that dashing young man who teaches me to play the piano. With his 2, 4, 3, 4, 6, 8 time, and play that passage faster. F-A-C-E, G-B-D, she loved that music master.
So that's a bit of Walter Laburnum's The Music Master. He had a good range of songs. You had to have quite a lot of songs, really, to survive. You probably needed about 6 or 7 songs, which would go down well with your audiences in different parts of the country, particularly if, like Fred Albert, or indeed Walter, you were moving around a good deal. Of course, it took quite a long time to do the whole circuit, so 6 or 7 songs would usually be enough. And if you think about it, actually, the popular music hall songs that we remember now, like My Old Man Said Follow the Van and Don't Dilly Dally on the Way, Mari Lloyd's big hit, that was a song which has gone down in history, really. And she really only had to go on stage and sing that, and people just loved her. Although we like to hear new material from comedians, and we like to hear new songs from singers, actually we also like the old stuff as well. If you go on YouTube, for example, and you look at the number of hits that the two Ronnies have had in their little sketch, Fork Candles, you'll see what I mean. He had some smashing song titles. Unfortunately, we've lost them now, but songs like 2,000 a Year, which obviously was aspiring to earning a lot of money, and the one I particularly liked was Unlimited Lou. Unlimited Lou, I assumed, referred to lots and lots of money, though it may have been a reference to bladder trouble, who knows. Anyway, that's Walter Laburnum, and he had a very, very good career. Like Fred Albert, not a very long one, but that was how it went. Here we are in the heart of the cemetery, which is the chapel. The chapel was 180 years old this May 2020, and it is the oldest non-denominational chapel in Europe, and a very fine building it is too. It's had quite a lot of restoration done to it, and hopefully it'll have a lot more. And to talk about various aspects round the chapel here, I have a friend of mine who's a local Stokey person, and with whom I've done a great deal of music hall. So can I introduce to you Mr. Peter John? And Peter's going to talk about something just over there, I think.
Hello, good morning. Good morning. Yes, very interesting, because here in this beautiful cemetery, apparently 2,500 trees, because it was an arboretum, as they poshly called it, before it was even a cemetery.
Right.
And I just wanted to point out this tree here, which is called a handkerchief tree. And it looks like any old tree at the moment, but in May it has wonderful blossoms which look exactly like a handkerchief.
I think we have a picture.
And it always attracts a great deal of attention, and people wonder what it is.
He does want to talk about
Many years ago, Colin, I was in the cemetery here, and I thought, I didn't think funerals took place here anymore,
no.
But there were vast cars, loads of people. It was a funeral obviously taking place, but in fact it was a video of the Amy Winehouse number Back to Black. And the people who were doing the video obviously asked permission to dig up a small patch of grass here and put a little gravestone which said, Here lies the heart of Amy Winehouse, R.I.P. The following day, they put the grass back, or when they finished the filming, they put the grass back. But it has never grown again on that very spot where that grave lay.
So there's grass all round it,
yes.
but not actually there.
The grass is a bit sparse at the moment due to the dry weather, but that's the very spot where the grave was. But I've something else that might interest you. Walk this way. This is the grave of George Leybourne, whose real name was Joseph Sanders, born near Gateshead, which surprised me, but he came to London, and he was known from there on as George Leybourne, but also by his famous number, Champagne Charlie.
Some people go for funny drinks and down them by the pail, like coffee, cocoa, tea and milk, and even Adam's ale. For my part, they can keep the lot. I never would complain. I wouldn't touch the bloomin' stuff. I only drink champagne. For Champagne Charlie is my name. Champagne drinking is my game. There's no drink as good as fizz, fizz, fizz. I drink every drop there is. All round town it is the same. By pop, 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 I rose to fame. And I'm the idol of the barmaids. And Champagne Charlie is my name. I earned my famous title through a hobby which I've got, of never letting others pay, however long the shot. Whoever drinks at my expense has no need to complain, for everyone I treat alike, I make them drink champagne. For Champagne Charlie is my name. Champagne drinking is my game. There's no drink as good as fizz, 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 and I drink every drop there is. All round town it is the same. By pop, 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 I rose to fame, and I'm the idol of the barmaids, and Champagne Charlie is my name. All together now! Champagne Charlie is my name. Champagne drinking is my game. There's no drink as good as fizz, fizz, fizz. I drink every drop there is. All round town it is the same. By pop, 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 I rose to fame. I'm the idol of the barmaids, and Champagne Charlie is my name.
It's interesting to note that his famous number, Champagne Charlie, was actually, dare I use the word, stolen by the Salvation Army.
That's right. Yes.
Who are buried near one of the entrances, William Booth and all his family.
Yes,
and they took the music of the song and made their own hymn to it, which is a bit naughty, isn't it? But that's some connection between the Sally Army and George Leybourne. He had a very, very successful but quite short career. He died at the age of 42, and I think probably spent a great deal of his money, because his grave, I see, was paid for by Dan Leno and the Water Rats.
Oh, was it?
Yes.
Was it? Yeah.
But also in the same grave is his son-in-law, who is Albert Chevalier, who was married to George Leybourne's daughter Florence. And Albert Chevalier had a French father and a Welsh mother, and his actual name, if I can read these correctly, was Albert Onseam Britannicus Void, whatever that is, Louis Chevalier, but he was known as Albert Chevalier.
What a relief.
Yes, and he was an actor as well as a very popular music hall performer with a vast amount of numbers, including My Old Dutch. Do you know My Old Dutch, Colin?
Should we give it a burst?
We've been together now for 40 years, and it don't seem a day too much. There ain't a lady living in the land as I'd swap for my dear old Dutch. And also a very popular number, which I'm sure you'll know. Why don't we give it a burst? Watcha, all the neighbours cry, who you gonna meet, Bill? Have you bought the street, Bill? Laugh, I thought I should have died. I knocked him in the Old Kent Road.
And here we have actually got a recording of Albert Chevalier singing.
Oh.
I've got a gal, a regular atanata. She's a real good old gal, and I'll tell you all about her. It's many years since first we met. Her hair was then as black as jet. It's white now, but she don't fret. Not my own gal. We've been together now for 40 years, and it don't seem a day too much. For there ain't a lady living in the land what I'd swap for my dear old Dutch. There ain't a lady living in the land what I'd swap for my dear old Dutch.
Those numbers were written with his brother Charles Ingle, who was also his manager. And it's worth mentioning that of Albert Chevalier, the author Lewis Carroll, who was not actually very fond of music hall, but he said, having seen him, he was decidedly good as an actor, but as a singer, with considerable powers of pathos as well, he was quite first-rate.
Gosh, praise indeed.
I'll tell you who else we have. Buried here,
Yes.
none other than Miss Nellie Power. Now, Nellie Power was a vicar's daughter. She was a child star and a pantomime performer, appearing very often as Principal Boy, and was extremely popular. She was the very first person to sing "The Boy I Love Is Up in the Gallery."
Oh, was she?
Yes, because she had the same agent as Marie Lloyd. And when she died, her agent gave the number to Marie Lloyd. So the number "The Boy I Love Is Up in the Gallery" is almost always associated with Marie Lloyd. But Miss Nellie Power was the first person to sing it. She died, as you can see, tragically young, aged 32. She was rather ill before she died, and her marriage had broken up, and she lived in penury, really, with her mother, not very far from here in Southgate Road, very near to Champagne Charlie.
I'm a young girl and I've just come over from the country where they do things big, and amongst the boys I've got a lover, and since I've got a lover, why I don't care a fig. The boy I
was Phoebe Weir singing The Boy I Love Is Up in the Gallery. And not long before that, we had Niall Weir giving us Champagne Charlie. We're going to stay talking about Nellie Power and women in music hall for a moment here, because I have a friend with me who is an actor and a music hall artist. This is Colette Kelly. Hello, Colette.
Hello.
And starting with Nellie, I gather that she also appeared, apart from in many, many music halls in London, at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane.
She did indeed.
she?
Yes, she played the title role in Sinbad the Sailor. And that was, I believe, 1881.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But of course, she had been in a lot of pantomimes playing Principal Boy.
Yeah.
So I would imagine it was like a similar sort of thing in Sinbad.
Yes. Did she bring any of that sort of Principal Boy stuff into her musical? I mean, was she dress up as a man and do the Ella Shields sort of stuff?
Oh gosh, yes. Well, she was the forerunner to Ella Shields and Vesta Tilley. Yes, right. She was one of the first male impersonators, and quite early on, I think when she was 15, she used to impersonate George Leybourne.
Oh, right. Yes. So when she was impersonating men on stage, was she doing the full male drag, or was she wearing something which just intimated that, or what?
No, she had her own individual style. Yeah. She wore a corset, like apparel.
Stand up and show us.
Okay.
Do the impersonation. Yes.
So she had a corset, pinched in at the waist, going out here, and a little apron thing around here with tassels. Right. She had calf-length boots, tights, and a little trilby hat with feathers.
Oh, right.
So, and also she used to smoke, I presume, a cigar.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine, I mean, it was probably a very sexy kind of image.
Yes. And she was presumably therefore sending up the sort of not particularly the working class, but more sending up the middle class, the sort of the clerks and the
Oh yes. Well, in fact,
boys.
She did both, because she had two famous songs, which they would always want her to sing the songs. Yeah. So one is The City Toff.
Yes.
And the other is Tiddy Fall Lol.
Right.
Now, in The City Toff, I'll quote from her song. He wears a penny flower in his coat, la-di-da, and a penny paper collar round his throat, la-di-da. So, of course, aimed at these poor men who were trying to, do better for themselves.
Yes.
But nevertheless, it usually went down well. Yeah. It probably went over their heads, except for one evening. There was a man in the audience who took great exception, and he got hold of a soda siphon and he hurled it at the stage towards her. Yes.
They were difficult audiences. I mean, if you were playing in the theatre, presumably like even when she was doing Sinbad the Sailor, you had a nice, well-behaved audience. Right? But the key characteristic, I think, of music hall audiences was they were jolly difficult and loud and rowdy and drunk, and
they were very, very, very hard. I mean, not particularly Nellie, but I mean with some of the other rougher type of establishments, they used to throw fruit and cabbages and all kinds of things. So the soda siphon was
stuck in trays. Yes.
But yes, so I mean, they must have been very strong, resilient women to be able to, and because they would play maybe 3 shows a night in different venues, they would tailor their material towards each audience.
Oh, really? So you wouldn't do the same thing in Hoxton that you might do in the Edgware Road, for instance? You have different material.
No, which is rather clever, isn't it?
But presumably rather expensive, because you'd need different costumes, different songs, and therefore different band parts.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, the costumes alone and the accessories. Yeah. Now, Nellie had jewellery apparently worth £1,500 just on jewellery.
Yes. And just go back a little bit on that, Colette. If she had that much in jewellery, what would she be earning a week? I mean, would she be earning hundreds and hundreds or tens of
So the scale went up. I mean, in 1871, for example, you could be earning about £12 a week.
This is if you're the top of the scale. Of
Yes.
the musical.
Oh, yes. Not if you were just up
yeah.
and coming.
Yeah.
Rolling on to 1889, for a principal boy, you could be earning from £60 to £100
Yes.
a week.
Yes. So in other words, £1,500 worth of jewellery
Yes.
is an awful lot.
An awful lot.
And yet, when she died, she seemed to be, well, penniless, didn't she? What happened to the jewellery?
Well, you see, it was a man, wasn't it? I'm afraid. So she married this Israel Barnett, and not knowing he was a bit of a cat and a very shady character. And it is thought that when her jewellery went missing, they thought, oh, it might have been a burglary. But in fact, as it transpired, there was a court case between him and one of Nellie's admirers, and Mr. Hobson, and the husband got very, very jealous and got into a brawl. It was brought to court, and that's when they came to light that he had a prison record.
Oh, this Barnett man.
The Barnett
right.
man.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, her lovely admirer was bound over to keep the peace and was fined about £60 or something.
Yes.
Yes.
But Barnett had made off with the jewellery.
Well, so putting two and two together. Yes. Yeah.
But even so, it was a very expensive life, wasn't it, if you were a big star like that? And that was just staying on the London circuit. Somebody like Fred Albert, for instance, whom we started off with, he was touring around the country. He was known in all the big halls all around the country. And that alone must have been quite expensive, just travelling around and getting digs and what have you.
Yes.
But staying in London, even living at home, she must have got, everybody must have got through a great deal of money, actually. I'm not surprised that not many people died rich, did they, in this business?
No, they didn't. It's rather sad, isn't it? And in addition to the costume, there were the band parts. Sometimes they had to have 10 band parts.
Oh, really?
Because you'd sometimes have a full orchestra.
Yes, of course.
In the lesser known places, you'd probably have a 5-piece.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, you had to have your music, your costumes, the expense of your horse and carriage and going from place to place. So yes, I mean they earned their money.
Yeah. But when working the audience was one of the great challenges, wasn't it? As we've already said.
Yes,
But you had to be very, very tough to do it. The men were tough, but the women were just as tough.
Just as tough.
And it's interesting also, I believe, that the women were on about the same pay scale. I kind of assumed that women would have been treated as second-class citizens and wouldn't have been paid as well. But actually, at the top of the tree, apparently they were paid as well as the men.
As well, if not more. Well, really, for women at the time, it was a great, the stage was a great profession, if you like. Although, it was looked down upon as being they're loose women. But if you consider the alternatives would be in needlework, working in the mill, working in service. I mean, this was actually a better opportunity.
And of course
for women.
more glamorous when it worked.
And more glamorous. But I do think it was sad, after all their hard work and the money that they earned, that they ended penniless.
Most of them did, yes.
And Nellie, even after her death, her mother Agnes was approached by the drapers in Islington for outstanding payment of £4, 4 shillings and 3pence for Nellie's bonnets, underclothing, gloves, fancy aprons and dress materials.
Gosh.
She was let off. The judge let the debt go because it wasn't fair, it wasn't fair.
Well, at that time, yes, and Nellie had been dead anyway, hadn't she? For
Yes, she was.
Yes.
So.
Well, thank you very much, Colette. And now we're going to go back to Abney again, to Peter John, who is standing by the grave of Nellie Power. So it is our very own, Mr. Peter John.
Also buried here, Colin, is a very, very prolific songwriter, G.W. Hunt wrote a very great number of music hall numbers, most of which have not stood the test of time, but were sung, many of them, by George Leybourne and also Miss Nellie Power.
Oh, yes.
Up in a Balloon, and famously made famous by the Players Theatre, Dear Old Pals. The Players Theatre, who did music hall for many, many years, behind Charing Cross Station, they used to end their shows almost with a number called Dear Old Pals, Jolly Old Pals, clinging together in all sorts of weather. Dear old pals, jolly old pals, give me the friendship of dear old pals. Talking about music hall, it'd be interesting to know more about music hall artistes.
Yes, and indeed, music hall chairman, I think.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. Now, I think I know just the person to do that, Peter.
Who would that be, Colin?
I think it would be my old friend and radio colleague, Mr. Barry Cryer.
Of course.
Memories of the Players Theatre, where I was a chairman. I failed my audition. My wife passed her audition, but I sang I'm Henry VIII, I Am, and I think Dennis Martin, the producer, thought, no, you're not. And I didn't get the job. But not long afterwards, Dennis rang me. They'd had a crisis. They had a roster of 3 chairmen, and none of the 3 could do the following week. And Dennis suddenly thought that I might be an idea. So I came in on the Monday, and one of the chairmen, Morris Browning, took me through the ritual. You had all sorts of ritual. The noise of the railway would go over ahead, and you'd toast the Romney Hythe and Dymchurch Railway, and you would ask in the second half anybody from Australia, how does it feel to be the right way up? And I remember one night there was an exotic creature with elaborate headdress and a robe, and I said, anybody celebrating a birthday? And the exotic creature stood up and I said, Madam, we wish you a happy birthday, we will sing for you. What is your name? And the man took the headgear off and said, my name is not Madam, so I had to cope with that ritual. The people I met, there was a big star, a very small man called Wee Georgie Wood, came to one of our charity nights on a Sunday, and I had announced him, Wee Georgie Wood, and he came up on the stage, and he said to the audience, my name is Wee Georgie Wood. You may have missed that due to the appalling diction of our chairman. So when he went off the stage, I bellowed, ladies and gentlemen, that was Wee Georgie Wood. And I looked in the audience one night and I thought, that is Phil Silvers, the American star, who's over here making a film. And after the show, I removed my sideburns, washed off my pancake makeup and put my glasses on, made my way to the bar, and Phil Silvers called out to me, hello. And I went over and he pointed at the stage and said, was that you? And I realised he'd been fascinated. He'd seen old music hall. A man offered me a tour of South Africa at the Players, and I thought, this was during apartheid, when we'd established an embargo. You didn't go there during apartheid. And we had a drink, and I said, this must be segregated audiences. What bloody kaffir wants to see a music hall, he said. Thank you, I said, and walked out. Johnny Hewer, who became Captain Burnside on television, had been approached, I think, and turned down the South African tour. The names, James Robertson Justice was working, whatever his situation was, behind the bar at the Players, and was very funny and did Latin and Greek quotes and made people laugh. And as before, there was a crisis about chairman, and he was put on one night as a deputy chairman, and it made a success of it, and I think he got spotted at the Players. Hattie Jakes worked at the Players, Clive Dunn, Peter Ustinov. I met a great old music hall star called Hetty King. Survivors of that era, she was at the Palace Theatre, I think, with Frankie Vaughan, who was a big star at the time. I worked subsequently with Max Miller. I met Tommy Trinder and Sandy Powell. But my memories also, the good old days, the television programme produced by Barney Colahan. And the first time I did it, I pandered to the Leeds audience and sang My Girl's a Yorkshire Girl and did Yorkshire jokes. And Barney said to me afterwards, "I'm going to use you again." I said, "Oh, thank you." He said, "I don't want that again." I said, "What do you want?" He said, "Scotsman." I said, "What?" He'd seen me playing a Scotsman or something, so I became an honorary Scot and subsequently wrote for Stanley Baxter, and Graham Garden, my friend, and I are still Hamish and Dougal on radio to these days. But one of the favourite memories of the good old days was doing a double act with Bernard Cribbins, a friend, and he would do a single act, I would do a single act, and then we'd come on at the end of the programme before the finale and do a double act. Barney Colan got 3 acts at the price of 2. One I particularly remember was the music played, dun 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 dun, and I emerged on the stage with my elaborate trousers and blouse and hoops and clubs and balls and threw them all in the air, and they just landed on the stage. Bernie Cribbins walked on and I said, "You're late."
Come on, Baz, tell us a joke.
"I owe you a joke, and I can see a lion there." So this was told by the late Tommy Cooper. A hyena, while he was out on his constitutional, you should have heard Tommy trying to say that word, he kept being attacked by a lion, which jumped out of the undergrowth and attacked him. And he was telling a gorilla this story, how fed up he was that being attacked by this lion. And the gorilla said, "If I ever see it happening to you, I will intervene on your behalf." Rather elegant wording for Tommy Cooper. And it happened again. The hyena was having his walk, the lion jumped out, attacked him, and ran off. And the hyena lay there, and he looked up, and the gorilla was relaxing on the branch of a tree. And the hyena said, "Excuse me," he said, "if you saw that happening, you would intervene on my behalf." And the gorilla said, "Well, you were laughing so much, I thought you were winning." That's all from me. Warm regards to Peter John. Over to Colin Sell.
Thank you, Barry. I think at this point I should talk just a little bit about being a music hall pianist. I've done an awful lot of music hall accompanying. I started off in about the late 1970s, I think, and one of the venues I used to play at a great deal was Chat's Palace in Chatsworth Road, where they used to do a music hall once a month, and I became a sort of regular pianist for a time. To make it authentic, they used to serve jellied eels. I don't know why I'm sounding so enthusiastic. I can't stand jellied eels. But anyway, it made a jolly night out for everybody. And it's a good way to learn how to accompany people doing music hall songs. They're not usually difficult to play. It's actually just the accompanying itself. Not so much the romantic and serious numbers, but the comedy numbers. The comedy numbers are hard work because you've got to know when to stop and when to start. Wait for the gag, and there'll be perhaps a nice long anecdote that you have to know the end of because you need to know when to come in again. And so all the music that I've ever played for comedy music hall performers has been scrawled over by many, many pianists in pencil, and quite often when I've come back to do an act many years later, I recognise my own handwriting. One of the best instructions I ever saw written on a piece of music was obviously written by a desperate pianist, and he just wrote, "Watch the bugger." Peter John mentioned riches and poverty. Riches. In music hall days, there was a lot of money to be made, but somehow, for most people, most of the performers, it got used up, as I suppose money does. One or two exceptions. There are a couple of people buried in Abney Park Cemetery who did very well. One is Lou Lake, and this is his grave. And Lou started off just doing songs on the halls. He wasn't a particularly big star, but then he went into songwriting, and then he went into producing music hall, and he ended up very smartly as the manager of Colin's Music Hall in Islington, on Islington Green. It's where Waterstones now is. And if you look at the front of Waterstones, I think you can see that the facade, particularly the awning, is probably the one that was there when Colin's Music Hall was there. Colin's Music Hall was very prestigious, it was very big. So Lou did very, very well there. And he died quite a wealthy man, as indeed did Albert Chevalier, who was always, always popular, even into old age, and he died comfortably off. Somebody else who's buried in the cemetery is Harry Hunter. And Harry Hunter was a songwriter as well as a performer, and he became part of the publishing firm of Francis, Day and Hunter. So that was all right. But then, unfortunately, for most musical performers, once you stopped working, that was it. George Leybourne died in poverty. Nellie Power died in poverty, as Peter said. And the strange thing is that at Nellie's funeral, they calculate that between 3,000 and 4,000 people turned up. Imagine that. The chapel absolutely crammed with people, and people milling around outside. And then they all went to the graveside, or got as close as they could, for the actual burial ceremony. And yet, poor Nellie died penniless. It's a sad story for many people. And one thinks, well, did they spend all the money on alcohol and gambling and generally loose living? Well, alcohol was a problem for many people. It was a bit of a problem in his later years for George Leybourne, it has to be said. But I think there's something else here that operates. And I do remember a television interview back in the 1960s with a very old lady living in straitened circumstances who had been a music hall star in her youth. Her name was Ida Barr. And the interviewer said, Miss Barr, he said, did you earn a lot of money doing music hall? And she said, yes, I did. She said, we all did, but you got through it. And the reason you got through the money was because, in the first place, you had to provide all your own costumes for your performances, which meant you had to spend a lot of money on having costumes made. So the more songs you had, the more costumes had to be made, which made it very expensive. And also, she said, you were the glamour. You were the sort of the television stars, if you like, of your day. So every time you stepped out into the street, you had to look terrific. You had to be wearing the latest fashions. And she said the difficulty was that you were living in East London, and you walked along the street, you saw some poor little kiddie with no shoes, and you gave him a few coppers, and you saw maybe a little girl dressed in rags, and it's a freezing cold day, and you gave her sixpence or something. She said this was a very, very quick way of getting through money. So not only had you got all the clothing and the costumes, you got this sort of alms giving as well. And the other thing was, she said, that music hall performers were very competitive. Everybody had to be seen in the right places. So you had to eat in the right places, you had to drink in the right places. So it meant, again, a great deal of outlay. So the money, again, got quickly used up. It was that simple. And she also said that by eating in the right places, that she put on a lot of weight. And she was walking down the street one day, dressed up to the nines, like a ship in full sail. And on the other side of the street were a couple of sailors. And she heard one talking to the other, and he nudged his friend. He said, look over there. He said, look, it's Ida Barr. The other one said, Ida Barr? She said, Ida bleeding pub. I think it's rather moving to stand by the graves of these music hall artists buried in Abney Park Cemetery. You sort of feel that under there lie the remains of somebody who, in his or her day, could walk out on stage to do a great song with charisma and talent and force of personality, and bring a whole theatre, hundreds and hundreds of people, to their feet, clapping and cheering and stamping and shouting for more. I think if you stand still in Abney Park Cemetery, sometimes in the distance you can sort of hear that applause echoing on. I think it's a wonderful thing that we have these people buried in Abney Park Cemetery, and I think they are very much our own, our very own. And if you'll forgive me, I'd just like to finish off with my favourite Albert Chevalier song, just a verse and a chorus. It's called The Future Mrs. Hawkins. I knows a little donor, I'm about to own her, she's a-gonna marry me. At first she said she wouldn't, then she said she couldn't, then she whispered, well, I'll see. Says I be Mrs. Hawkins, Mrs. Henry Hawkins, or across the seas I'll roam. So help me, Bob, I'm crazy. Liza, you're a daisy. Won't you share my humble home? Won't you? Oh, Liza, sweet Liza, if you die's an old maid, you'll have only yourself to blame. Dear Liza, dear Liza, how'd you fancy Hawkins for your other name? That's it. Cheerio.
Thank you if you have been watching. And I noticed that Lindsay McDermott sent something into the chat box, and she believes she may have an ancestor who performed in music hall buried in Abney Park Cemetery. And I'm sorry if we missed out on that particular artiste, but it's quite interesting actually how the artistes were shown in the music halls in the old days, because the audience was very fluid. They sort of dropped in and dropped out. They didn't always come for the whole evening. And at the side of the stage, there would be a number on a large easel. And that would tell you which number it was on the bill. So you got hold of a bill of what was on and who was on that evening. And that would tell you what was on at that particular moment. And you would know roughly then how long to wait before you wanted to go and see the particular person you fancied seeing. So I hope that answers that question, Lindsay, to a certain extent. I've no idea whereabouts on the bill your ancestor would have been, of course. Have we got any more questions? I'm looking at the chat box, presumably, am I? Right, okay. Oh, yes, right. Did Stoke Newington have a music hall? I don't know is the answer to that. I would be very surprised if it didn't somewhere along the line, perhaps earlier in the days of music hall, because they were so very popular. It's a very good way of making money. It was probably held in a pub because the landlords were originally the chairman, and they would pay a bit of money or they buy a few drinks to the people who are going to get up and do the songs. And usually the landlord would sort of run the evening, as it were, and sort out the running order. And if you watch the film of Oliver Twist made in 1948 by David Lean, you'll see in that there's a pub scene in that with Hattie Jake singing a song very badly on purpose. And in that, the landlord of the pub, played by Peter Bull, he's the man in charge. And that's how it started. So almost certainly there would have been music hall performing going on, even if it wasn't in a purpose-built theatre. Somebody's asked, why has Abney ended up being the burial ground for so many entertainers? I think the answer for that is that because it's a sort of East End graveyard, and so many performers came from the East End because music hall was an East End popular genre. That's probably the reason. Music hall, actually, I've been informed, started, the first one apparently that's been tracked down, started in Bolton. And then after that, Birmingham picked it up. But I think it's true to say that London, the East End of London, was really where it grew and blossomed. So I hope that answers your question there. A lot of the music halls became very, very popular, and people would come down from the West End of London, the posh end, and sort of do a slumming evening. They come down and see music halls in the East End. So that would mean that eventually enough money was being made by these landlords that they could actually have a purpose-built music hall. So they moved west. So for instance, at Waterloo, there was the Britannia Music Hall, which was absolutely luxurious. It showed off all the music hall stars, good, bad and indifferent, but it also had restaurants, it had fountains, it had grand staircases, it had gardens. So it was a much, much posher do than you would have had perhaps down the East End in the middle of the 19th century. Somebody said, follow up to that, someone asked if Abney was chosen because of its proximity to Hackney Empire. I suppose I need correction on this, but I would imagine that it probably is the biggest graveyard in this area. And of course, it's
one is liable to have people buried, I think, where their fellow workers are buried, as it were. And there are some walks, which I'm sure some of you will know, through the cemetery, which are very grand indeed. And there's a very, very fine obelisks and graves and monuments and so on, almost like sort of Millionaire's Row, as it were. And I think that maybe, you know, that because one or two people got buried there, then it became the fashion to do it. That's kind of guesswork on my part. Is Abney special compared with other cemeteries, or do they all have music hall stars? The music hall stars, they are buried all over London, in all the cemeteries. I think certainly the big cemeteries. There are something called, I think it's the Magnificent Seven or the Big Seven, which include Abney, and I can't remember the names of all the others, but I do know from having done the research on this that we have got music hall stars in just about every one of the big cemeteries in London. Wilton's Music Hall. Somebody says, does Wilton's Music Hall, which you may know is down by Tower Bridge, did it have a particular reputation? It was a very, very good place to play. Wilton's was a very good place. If you could play at Wilton's, you were doing very, very well indeed. It was rather like playing Colin's Music Hall on Islington Green. Do you know if socially distanced singing will be possible soon? We had to do social distancing while we were making the film, certainly, and I hope you observed that, because we certainly tried to observe it. The difficulty with socially distant singing, of course, is you tend to lose track of what the other person is singing if they're kind of a metre or two away from you. I've done a bit of trying to accompany people on the piano with them on Zoom, and that has been very tricky indeed and rather frustrating, I have to say. Much easier to send somebody a backing track to sing to. But I do know that a lot of choirs are starting up now, and they are trying to do sort of singing on Zoom. And there have been actually examples I've seen on television of choirs singing socially distanced. But of course, these are very, very good singers who've got very, very good pitch and so on. And that makes it a whole lot easier. And somebody else has asked, are there any other old music halls still surviving in London apart from Hoxton Hall? Well, of course, there is Wilton's, but because it's used mainly now as the theatre. Hoxton is used as a sort of community theatre, really, and has all sorts going on. Chatsworth Palace in Chatsworth Road, that was a music hall. It's also, it's been all sorts of things in its time, actually. As I said earlier, I played there a great deal in the 1970s when they did music hall there quite regularly. It goes back to the old thing, really, about it being, you know, pubs were the sort of the focus of them, really. And I think any publican who could make music hall work and make it pay will perhaps then, you know, enlarge his premises and build up a reputation. I think that's all we have, and I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching this. I do hope you've enjoyed it, and I do wish you all the very best. Please take care, look after yourselves and stay safe, and good night.